I wake up every morning at 5:45. Not because I want to, but because my body still believes I'm in the field. Somewhere in the mountains of Peru or under the sun-bleached dust of the Mojave. That rhythm never left me. Long after the digs stopped, my bones still carry the schedule. It's both a blessing and a curse. Today is no different. Outside the window of my small house in Evanston, Illinois, the world is still draped in early morning blue. Inside, I sit at the edge of my bed, clutching the cane. That's been my loyal companion since my right hip gave up on subtlety. I lean forward, press my palm against the dresser, and brace for the first small battle of the day standing. Right leg first, it hurts a little less. Inhale, exhale, push, stand. My knees scream. My back threatens rebellion. But I rise. A small, wobbly victory. I whisper. Still got it. To the empty room. No one hears. No one needs to. The cane worn. Smooth where my fingers always land rests against the wall like an old comrade. I bought it in Santa Fe after a lecture. Back when it was more of a fashion statement than a necessity. Now, it's practically my third leg. 14 steps to the bathroom. I count them. I always do. In 1984, I once trekked 5 miles through heatstroke to reach an excavation site in Honduras. Now a dozen steps feel like a marathon. I catch my reflection in the mirror. Short silver hair swept back. Deep-set lines like carved topography. But the eyes still sharp. Still burning blue. Still mina. By the time I make it to the kitchen, the kettle is already hissing on the stove. I never did switch to one of those electric ones. There's comfort in the whistle. A reminder of field camps. Tin cups. And the smell of instant coffee brewed over portable burners. The kitchen is small, but it's mine. On the walls, photographs from a life my son Brian barely asks about. Me shaking hands with local tribespeople in the Andes. Me presenting at an academic conference in Oxford. Me, 20 years younger. Knee-deep in a trench in Utah. Brush in hand. Joy in my face. Brian says the house is too much. Says I should consider a retirement community where I can get the care I need. What he really means is where someone else can deal with me. He visits every Sunday, always in a rush. Always checking his phone. He'll hand me groceries without asking what I need. He'll glance at the bookshelf I built myself. Or the artifact cases I arranged. And say something like, "Still hanging on to that old stuff." Huh? Then he'll ask if I've taken my pills. He never asks if I've read anything new. Or if I've heard from colleagues. Or, God forbid if I miss the work. But I don't complain. I bake the oatmeal cookies he no longer eats. I set out tea he doesn't drink. I talk about my grandson Liam. He listens politely. Then he leaves. And the house, filled with relics of the past, goes quiet again. Some mornings, I wonder how did I go from the woman who rewrote the theory of tribal migration to the woman people think needs supervision just for boiling tea? The answer comes in a whisper I didn't change. They just stopped seeing me. But I'm still here. And I'm not done yet. I spent the next 3 days in bed. The fever came first, then the cough. The aches, and the deep chill that even the electric blanket couldn't chase away. But the worst part wasn't the cold. It was the bruises. Deep. Purple. Ugly things blooming along my arms and hips like ink stains. Skin at my age bruises like fruit. Every movement hurt. Breathing hurt. But nothing hurt quite like the memory of Brian laughing as I flailed in the pool. By the 4th morning, I forced myself to stand. Slowly. One foot, then the other. Archaeology taught me something valuable if you sit too long. The earth swallows you whole. And I wasn't ready to be buried. Not yet. I made myself strong tea with lemon and honey, my mother's old remedy, and sat at my desk by the window. Outside, Evanston was draped in snow. It looked peaceful. My bones disagreed. On the desk sat the unfinished letter from Harris Wilmot, my former student. Now a full professor at Stanford. He'd sent photos from a new dig in Nevada. Asking for my opinion. I still remember your lecture on settlement patterns. He wrote, "You once changed how I saw everything." I picked up the letter, then looked down at my hands, arthritic. Shaky, but still capable. Capable enough? I rolled the typewriter toward me. Yes. I have a computer, but the keys on the Underwood are bigger, louder, more forgiving. My fingers, warped with time, know their way around its clunky rhythm. Click-clack. Click. Space. Backspace. Click. As the words took shape, I felt the ache in my chest ease just a little. The phone rang. It was Liam. "Grandma," he said. "How are you feeling?" I hesitated, then told him the truth. I'm sore. I'm tired. But I'm not done yet. He paused. "Dad said you won't return his calls." I smiled without humor. Hard to answer calls that never came. He didn't argue. He knew. We talked for 20 minutes about school. About a new book he was reading. About nothing important. But every word stitched something back together. When we hung up, I stared at the window. Snowflakes drifted like memory. Soft. Quiet. Unapologetics. Then I made a decision. A quiet one, but firm. I would no longer wait for my family to see me. I would show up for myself instead. The next day, I took a cab to the hearing clinic. The old device was ruined, no surprise. The new one cost $2. Ling. Insurance covered some. The rest I paid in full. Not because I had to, but because I could. When I returned home, I brewed a second pot of tea, sat back at my desk, and reopened my collection catalog. Years ago, Edgar and I had dreamed of publishing a full archive of our fieldwork. But life got in the way. Now I had time. I had purpose. I had every artifact carefully labeled in the basement. Arrowheads from Utah. Bone beads from New Mexico. Clay fragments from Guatemala. Each one had a story. And I was still the only one who knew how to tell them. That night, I sat down and wrote a letter to the local museum in Evanston, the Regional Center for Cultural History. I introduced myself not as Brian's mother, not as a retiree, but as Dr. Eleanor Hartman, field anthropologist and educator. I offered to give a lecture. No response came that week, but I didn't care, because for the first time in years, I wasn't just existing in someone else's life. I was living in my own. Title: They ignored her for years, then gave her a standing ovation. The email came on a Tuesday morning. Subject line: Lecture invitation. Evanston Cultural History Center. I blinked twice before opening it. Somehow, I expected silence. Another rejection. Another thank you for your interest boilerplate dismissal. But this wasn't that. This was from Dr. Any20. Margaret Lynn, the center's new director. She had read my letter, then looked up my work papers published in The American Anthropologist. Lectures archived from the early 90s. Field photos taken decades ago. Your research on pre-Columbian migration patterns in the Southwest is still cited in grad programs today. She wrote, "We'd be honored to host a lecture if you're willing." I stared at the screen, motionless. For a moment, I wasn't in Evanston. I was in the Chihuahuan Desert again, brushing sand off an obsidian blade, while Edgar shouted from the ridge, "Ellie, come look at this." For the first time in years, someone wasn't asking about my medication or my last checkup. They were asking for my mind. I replied yes before I could overthink it. The event was scheduled for the 15th of next month. Plenty of time, Margaret said, to prepare whatever I needed. Slides, notes, visuals, anything I liked. She even offered tech support. If PowerPoint feels like a foreign language, I laughed out loud at that line. I hadn't used PowerPoint since Bush's first term. But that week, I dusted off my old laptop, the one Edgar had insisted I keep even after retirement. There's still work to be done, he said back then. Turns out he was right. I spent the following days crafting my presentation. Maps, charts, photos from the field, some still scanned from film. I titled the lecture Paths Through Dust Migration. Memory and Meaning in the Southwest? Catchy enough. Academic enough. Me enough. Meanwhile, Brian called. Twice. I let it ring. He left voicemails about a family dinner the weekend before the lecture. Just something low-key. He said, "Leah's birthday. She'd love to see you." I didn't believe that for a second. The last time I saw Leah, she asked if I was the old lady who collects broken rocks. Still, I didn't call back. Not because I was angry, but because I was busy. The day of the lecture came faster than expected. Margaret sent a car. A small gesture, but thoughtful. The driver was young, barely out of college, and when I told him I was giving a talk, his eyebrows shot up. "You're the speaker?" he asked. Amazed. I smiled. "Is that so hard to believe?" He grinned. "No. Mom, I just hope I look half as cool as you at 80. The venue was full when I arrived. More than full. Actually, the small auditorium had been overbooked. Latecomers stood along the walls. Students, professors, locals, journalists, curious retires. It was a crowd I hadn't seen in decades. As Margaret walked me to the podium, something strange happened. People stood. They applauded. Not polite. Brief claps but loud. Sincere applause. It wrapped around me like sunlight. Not for my age. Not for my struggle. But for my mind. My work. My life. I took a deep breath. Then I began. For 45 minutes. I walked them through a life lived in dust and history digging. Documenting. Discovering. I showed them pottery shards that rewrote timelines. Described ancient footpaths that told forgotten stories. They listened. They asked questions. They cared. And when I finished, they stood again. This time, I almost cried. But I didn't. Because I was back. Not just as a mother. Not just as a widow. But as Dr. Eleanor Hartman, anthropologist, educator, and explorer of forgotten worlds. 2 days after the lecture, the doorbell rang. I knew it would be him. Brian stood on my porch holding a box of store-bought muffins, blueberry, his version of a peace offering. His tie was loose. His smile forced. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Got a minute?" I stepped aside and motioned him in. He didn't wait. Just walked straight to the kitchen like it was still his childhood home. "You look good," he offered, scanning me like he was checking for damage. "I'm fine," I said. "Would you like some tea?" "Sure," he said, already pulling out a chair. As the kettle boiled, the silence stretched. I looked uncomfortable. I didn't help him out of it. Finally, he cleared his throat. So, about the museum thing, he said. I heard it went well. It did. I replied. A full house. Standing ovation. That's good. I'm glad you're still doing something with that archaeology stuff. That archaeology stuff, I echoed. He winced. You know what I mean? Do I wanted to say, but I let it go. Brian leaned forward. Look, Mom, I wanted to talk to you about something. Jess and I have been thinking, with everything that happened at the Christmas party, maybe it's time you considered a retirement community. There it was. The sentence I'd been waiting for. I stirred honey into my tea and said nothing. It's not that we don't trust you, he continued. We just worry. The fall in the pool. The hearing aid. The bruises. You're living alone. What if something worse happens, Brian? I said calmly. What happened in that backyard wasn't an accident. You pushed me. He blinked. It was a joke. You're still upset about that. I could have drowned. He shook his head. Frustrated. Mom. The water was 4 feet deep. For you. I said, maybe. For me. With arthritis and soaked clothes and no hearing aid. It felt like the ocean. A looked down. Then back up at me. We're just trying to help. No. I said, you're trying to manage me. To tuck me away neatly so I don't disrupt your routine. His expression hardened. That's not fair. What's not fair? I replied. Is being treated like a burden instead of a mother. Like a liability instead of a person. Silence. Brian took a sip of his tea and avoided my eyes. You know, I continued. At the museum. No one asked my age. No one checked if I'd taken my pills. They asked about my ideas. My fieldwork. My mind. He didn't respond. I set down my cup. I'm not going to a retirement home. Brian. Not now. Not until I decide I can't live on my own terms. And that day hasn't come. He exhaled sharply. So that's it, you're just going to isolate yourself. No. I'm going to live. On my terms. You're welcome to be part of that, but not if it comes with conditions. He looked stunned. And maybe something else. Something closer to realization. A minute later, he stood. Well, Jess is making dinner next Sunday. Leah would love to see you. Would she? I asked. Or would she just be told I was coming? He didn't answer. Tell her I'm busy. I said. Doing what, being me? I said simply. Brian opened his mouth. Then closed it. At the door. He paused. You know. Mom, you used to scare me when I was a kid. I raised an eyebrow. Why's that? You were never like the other moms. Always talking about ruins and tombs and bones. I never really understood it. And now he hesitated. I still don't. But I'm starting to think, maybe that's on me. He left before I could reply. And for the first time in a long time, I felt light. Spring came early that year. The tulips in my front yard bloomed 2 weeks ahead of schedule, bold and unapologetic. Bursting from the soil like they'd waited long enough. I knew exactly how they felt. A formal envelope arrived in the mail that morning. Cambridge University. I recognized the crest instantly. Inside a letter from Harris Wilmot. He was inviting me to consult on a new research initiative involving ancient trade networks across the American Southwest. All expenses covered. Of course. He wrote, we could use your eyes. My hands trembled not from age, but from awe. They still wanted me. Not out of pity. not as a relic, but as a scholar. I packed slowly, deliberately, the same suitcase I'd used in Peru, Jordan, and New Mexico still waited in the closet. Its worn leather corners and airport tags a map of a life well-traveled. As I laid out clothes, I came across the brooch Edgar gave me on our 30th anniversary, a small silver hawk. Wings spread wide. I pinned it to my jacket and smiled. Before I left, another envelope arrived. This one was pink, glossy, covered in glitter stickers. You're invited to Leah's 6th birthday. The handwriting was clearly Jessica's. There was a note scribbled underneath. Hope you can come. She's been asking about you. It should have warmed my heart, but it didn't. Because I knew better. Leah didn't ask. She was told. Like a script she was expected to recite. I turned the invitation over once. Twice. Then I gently set it aside. The symposium at Cambridge was everything academia used to be: restless minds, long conversations, bad coffee, and brilliant ideas. I stood in front of a hall of graduate students and professors and gave a keynote on memory and migration in the forgotten deserts. When I finished, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "I'm here because of you," she whispered. "Your work showed me that women could dig too. That our hands belong in history." I didn't say anything. I just took her hands in mine. Caroused. Cold. Strong. And nodded. Back home in Evanston, the air felt different. Lighter. Like something had been lifted. Liam came by the next day. He brought me a printed photo from the symposium, me on stage. Hands raised. Passion in my face? "Grandma," he said, "I want to record your stories." "For what?" "For the ones who'll come after." We spent the next week cataloging everything. Every artifact in my basement. Every note in my field journals. Every photo from old dig sites. He asked questions no one had ever bothered to ask before. And I answered. Sometimes with laughter. Sometimes with tears. But always with truth. On a quiet Sunday, I got another call from Brian. Voicemail again. "Mom," he said. I don't know what to say anymore. I guess I just miss when things were simple. They were never simple. He just hadn't noticed how complicated I'd always been. I never called back. Not out of anger. But because I was finally done chasing something that was never mine to hold. Respect doesn't come from titles or bloodlines. It comes from those who choose to see you fully, without shrinking your worth. I'm no longer waiting to be seen. I am choosing to stand. Even if it's slower now. Even if it hurts. Because some of us weren't made to fade quietly into family albums or rocking chairs. Some of us were born to dig, to uncover, to disturb the dust, and remind the world. We were here. And we still are. Maybe you know someone like her. A woman who built a life out of passion and purpose only to be slowly pushed into the background by the very people she once carried. A woman whose name once opened doors, but who now gets called mom, grandma, or worse, a burden. Doctor. Eleanor Hartman didn't fight to be seen. She didn't scream or beg or throw her pain at others. No. She did something far more powerful. She remembered who she was. She chose herself. In a world that often measures value by youth, beauty, or bank accounts, Eleanor reminded us that true worth is quieter but deeper. It's the dust on an artifact, the lines etched into an aging hand, the stories we carry, the wisdom we earned. This story isn't just about a lecture, or a pool, or a birthday invitation left unanswered. It's about boundaries, about knowing the difference between love and obligation, about standing your ground, even when your knees shake, about understanding that dignity doesn't retire. and neither should your voice. To every viewer who's ever felt ignored, overlooked, or erased because of your age, your difference, or your truth, this story is yours too. And maybe you're not an anthropologist. Maybe you never held a piece of broken pottery or rewrote academic history. But maybe you've survived things no one applauded for. Maybe you've shown up every day, quietly doing what had to be done, even as the world stopped noticing. Maybe you're still here stronger than you think, wiser than they know. Just like Eleanor. Because some legacies aren't printed in books or displayed in glass cases. Some legacies live in the way we choose to rise when the world tries to sit us down. So, if no one's told you lately, you are not forgotten. You are not finished. And you don't need permission to stand tall. Not from your family. Not from your past. And certainly not from a world that doesn't yet understand the treasure you are. Doctor. Eleanor Hartman never faded quietly, and neither should you.